Good evening, my friends. Before we begin, I want to know something. Tell me, where are you watching this from tonight? Because in the next few minutes, I'm taking you far away, to a place where the ground bleeds red dust, where silence is louder than machines, and where an entire nation decided to rise when the world told them to kneel. This isn't a headline. It's not politics. It's faith, rebellion, and destiny wrapped inside one impossible dream. A dream that begins with a closed sky and ends with a people who learn to fly without permission. It was a morning unlike any other in Ouagadougou. The air was still. Birds circled low. And for the first time in years, the sky above the capital was empty, not a single aircraft in sight. Then came the message, short and sharp, breaking across radio waves like thunder over sand. All airspace above Burkina Faso is closed until further notice. Across the world, analysts scrambled. Why would a small landlocked nation shut its own skies? Was it fear? A threat? A mistake? But in the heart of the Sahel, among the people who have known drought, hunger, and invasion, the silence carried a different meaning. It was not fear. It was declaration. That same evening, when the sun dipped into the red horizon, a young soldier stood before the nation. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, calm eyes, weathered hands, the sand of his homeland still clinging to his boots. He spoke not from a palace, but from a field, bare, unguarded, honest. His voice was steady. If they will not give us wings, then we will build our own sky. Those words became lightning. They ran through radios, marketplaces, and hearts. Women repeated them over dinner fires. Children whispered them before sleep. Elders nodded, remembering another time when men spoke with that kind of conviction. For the first time in years, hope wasn't imported, it was homegrown. The next morning, the roads to the desert filled with people. Farmers, students, soldiers, masons walking, riding, some carrying nothing but shovels. They said there was work to do, a new kind of work. Traoré's message had spread. Burkina Faso would build its own international airport, its own aviation dream without loans, without permission, without apology. The world called it madness. But to the people, it was prophecy. At sunrise, men began marking the earth. Lines in the sand where runways would someday stretch. There were no blueprints, no foreign contractors, just faith, muscle, and will. In a land where the soil remembers blood, this was a different kind of battle. By noon, trucks rolled in, loaded with gravel and steel. Old military vehicles were repurposed as bulldozers. Women mixed concrete in buckets, singing songs their grandmothers once sang during harvest. Children carried water to the workers. The desert, once silent, came alive with the rhythm of work and worship. When a reporter asked a tired mason why he came, he smiled, "Because I want to see my country fly before I die." Those words became the heartbeat of the movement. Posters carried his, quote, "Schools painted it on walls." The phrase echoed from radio towers to the smallest villages. Within a week, the impossible began to take shape. Steel pillars rose like prayers. Solar panels were dragged across the sand, catching the light of a merciless sun. The noise of engines returned not from planes, but from the people's hands. Each nail, each beam, was a defiance against centuries of dependency. Then came the first challenge. International banks froze aid. Suppliers canceled contracts. Fuel shipments stopped. The message was clear: you cannot build without us. But Traoré answered in silence, not through speeches, but through action. He called for engineers to come forward, not from Paris, not from London, from Bobo Dioulasso, from Koudougou, from the villages where machines were fixed with wire and willpower. They came barefoot, young, determined. They melted old scrap into usable metal. They turned rust into structure. When generators failed, they built wind turbines from salvaged car parts. When fuel ran dry, they dug wells and used biofuel made from crops. It was no longer just construction, it was resurrection. In the evenings, after long hours of work, people gathered around fires. There was no entertainment, only stories. Stories of Sankara, of ancestors who dreamed of unity, of mothers who fed armies of hope with one pot of rice. The stars above the desert flickered like watchful eyes, as if heaven itself was taking note. Meanwhile, in Western capitals, the laughter began to fade. Intelligence reports showed something alarming. Despite isolation, the construction was progressing faster than expected. Satellite images revealed entire runways forming out of dust. Experts couldn't explain how a country with no funds, no partnerships, and no logistics was achieving the impossible. But those on the ground understood. It wasn't technology, it was faith. One night, when the generators failed completely, the workers sat in darkness. Then someone lit a small oil lamp. Another followed, then a third. Soon the entire camp glowed under hundreds of small flames. A soldier looked at the lights and said softly, "Even the stars have joined us." And they kept working through the night. Days turned to weeks. The world's sanctions deepened, but so did the people's resolve. When they could no longer buy cement, they made their own from local clay. When foreign machines broke, blacksmiths rebuilt them by hand. They didn't wait for solutions, they became them. Then came the storm, a real one. A wall of sand and wind that swallowed the horizon, tearing tents and blinding eyes. For 3 days and nights, they couldn't see the sun. Food ran out. Water turned to mud. But when the storm cleared, the people rose again. An old man, his clothes torn by the wind, looked at the ruins and said, "If the desert wanted to test us, it failed. We are made of the same dust." They rebuilt twice as fast. That was the turning point. The desert had bowed to human will. And now the people believed not just in Traore, but in themselves. News began to spread beyond the borders. Videos of workers chanting "under the sun," photos of women in helmets, laughing as they carried steel rods. A drone shot of the half-finished runway glowing gold under the dawn. It went viral. In Ghana, students formed study groups to learn about Burkina's project. In Nigeria, youth movements quoted Traore's line, "We will build our own sky." End quote. End quote. Across Africa, a quiet fire began to burn. Meanwhile, foreign governments debated intervention, but every attempt to intimidate the project backfired. The harder they tried to suffocate the dream, the stronger it grew. Burkina Faso had stopped asking for permission, and that was what frightened the world the most. Months later, the runways stretched miles across the desert. Towers gleamed. Solar farms powered entire villages. Children went to school at night under new lights. And for the first time, the poorest families in the country could look at the horizon and see proof that their sweat had built something eternal. A French reporter who visited the site wrote, "They are not building an airport. They are building the idea of Africa." Then came the day no one would forget. The air was heavy, the wind slow. Crowds lined the runways, thousands of them. Mothers holding babies, old men leaning on canes, children waving handmade flags. Even the soldiers looked nervous. In the distance, a faint roar began. A shadow crossed the sand. Out of the haze, a silver shape appeared, small, imperfect, but real. It was the first aircraft built on African soil, by African hands, fueled by African hope. As it lifted off, the crowd fell silent. Then, an explosion of sound, cheers, cries, prayers. Some people dropped to their knees. Others simply stared upward, unable to believe what they were seeing. The pilot's voice crackled through a radio speaker. "Burkina Faso is in the air." Tears rolled down weathered faces. Children screamed in joy. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman whispered, "We have touched the sky." End quote, end quote, end quote, end quote, and the surge. And for once, the world had no answer. In Paris, they called it symbolic. In Washington, they called it defiant. But in Ouagadougou, they called it freedom. Traore stood at the edge of the runway, silent, his hands clasped behind his back. He watched the plane rise higher until it became a speck of light. Then he said quietly, "We didn't build this to fly away. We built it so no African child ever begs for wings again." That line was carried across the world, printed, quoted, shared. Because it wasn't just about flight. It was about dignity. It was about what happens when people stop waiting for permission to dream. As night fell, the airport lights shimmered across the desert like constellations fallen to earth. Children pointed to them and said, "Look, that's our sky now." And maybe that's the real lesson here. That faith, when fueled by unity, can turn even dust into destiny. That the silence of the world means nothing when a nation finds its voice. That no sanction, no blockade, no empire can stop the hands of people who believe. So before you scroll away, tell me, where are you watching this from tonight? Because somewhere under your sky, another dream is waiting to rise. And when it does, when you finally build your own sky, remember this: freedom isn't given. It's built by hands that refuse to kneel and hearts that dare to believe. May the dust remember your name. May your sky stay open. And may we all, one day, learn to fly without permission.